Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Red-Headed League.
It was on an autumn morning, touched with that faint golden melancholy which London wears so well, that I called upon my friend Sherlock Holmes at Baker Street. I had not written ahead, nor sent word of my visit. It was one of those impulsive decisions that come upon a man when the day feels too quiet and the mind too restless. Holmes, I knew, was rarely idle for long. If he was not engaged in a case, he was deep in thought, or sunk into one of those strange, reflective silences that seemed to draw him inward, far from the ordinary world. As I entered, Mrs. Hudson informed me that he was occupied. That alone was enough to stir my curiosity. I stepped quietly toward the sitting room, intending only to glance inside before withdrawing. Yet the moment I saw him, I paused. Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers pressed together, his eyes bright with that sharp, focused energy I'd come to recognize as the prelude to deduction. Opposite him sat a man of a most striking appearance. He was stout, almost heavily so, with a broad, florid face and small, restless eyes. But what commanded immediate attention, and what dominated the entire impression, was his hair. It was a blazing, unmistakable red. Not merely reddish, not auburn, but vivid, almost fiery. A color so intense that it seemed to glow even in the muted light of the room. I began to withdraw, murmuring an apology for my intrusion. But Holmes moved with sudden decisiveness.
"My dear Watson,"
he said warmly.
"you could not possibly have come at a better time."
I hesitated. I was afraid you were engaged.
"So I am,"
he replied with a faint smile.
"Very much so, which is precisely why you must stay."
Before I could protest, he had drawn me into the room and shut the door behind me.
"This gentleman,"
Holmes continued, gesturing toward our visitor,
"has been good enough to place a matter before me of the most unusual kind. I believe it will interest you greatly."
The red-haired man rose slightly, giving a polite but uncertain nod. His eyes moved between us with a mixture of curiosity and unease.
"Mr. Jabez Wilson,"
Holmes said. I inclined my head. "A pleasure, sir." Holmes settled back into his chair, fingertips once again pressed together.
"You know, Watson, you have often expressed your appreciation for the curious and the unconventional. Indeed, your published accounts have shown a certain enthusiasm for the more unusual aspects of my work."
"I merely record what I see," I replied.
"With occasional embellishment, but no matter. What concerns us now is that life itself, real life, is far stranger than any fiction, and Mr. Wilson's experience is a perfect example of that truth."
He turned to the man.
"Pray, Mr. Wilson, begin again. Tell your story from the start, and do not omit any detail, however trivial it may seem. It is often the smallest fact that proves most decisive."
The man shifted in his seat, drawing a crumpled newspaper from his coat.
"Well, Mr. Holmes, it all began with this."
He flattened the paper on his knee, smoothing it with thick fingers, and pointed to a small advertisement. Before he spoke further, I took the opportunity to observe him more closely. He was, in most respects, an entirely ordinary tradesman. His clothes were serviceable, but worn. His coat was unbuttoned, his waistcoat slightly stained, and a heavy brass watch chain hung across his middle. There was nothing remarkable about him, except that extraordinary hair and the faint expression of dissatisfaction that lingered on his face. Holmes, who had been watching me, smiled faintly.
You are attempting to deduce something, Watson.
I confess, without success. Holmes leaned forward slightly.
Then allow me. Our visitor has at some time performed manual labor. He takes snuff. He is a Freemason. He has been in China, and he has done a considerable amount of writing recently.
Mr. Wilson started as if struck.
How on earth?
Holmes waved a hand gently.
Your hands, sir. Your right is larger and more developed than your left, a clear sign of manual work. The snuff is visible upon your coat. Your Masonic pin speaks for itself. The tattoo upon your wrist, of a fish, delicately colored, could only have been done in China. And your cuffs? One is polished from constant writing, the other shows the pressure of a resting elbow.
Mr. Wilson stared in astonishment, then gave a short, incredulous laugh.
Well, I thought it must be something clever, but now I see it's all plain enough.
Holmes leaned back.
Plain, once explained.
He gestured to the newspaper.
Now then, the advertisement.
Mr. Wilson cleared his throat and handed it to me. I read it carefully. It was absurd. A vacancy in something called the Red-Headed League. A salary of £4 a week. Eligibility restricted entirely to men with red hair. I read it twice, then looked up. What on earth does this mean? Holmes chuckled softly, clearly delighted.
An excellent question, one that lies at the heart of the matter.
He turned to Wilson.
Please continue.
The man settled himself and began.
I run a small pawnbroker's business, sir, in Saxe-Coburg Square. It's not much, but it keeps me going. I used to employ 2 assistants, but now I have only one. A fellow named Vincent Spaulding.
Holmes's eyes flickered briefly at the name.
And this assistant, how would you describe him?
Quick, very quick. Smart, too. Works for half wages, which is a blessing in my situation. Though he has his odd ways.
In what sense?
Well, photography for one. Always disappearing into the cellar with his camera. Says he's developing pictures. Spends hours down there sometimes.
Holmes said nothing, but I noticed a subtle tightening at the corners of his eyes. Wilson continued.
It was he who showed me the advertisement. Came down one morning with the paper and says, I wish I were a red-headed man.
The pawnbroker gave a short laugh.
I asked him why, and he told me about this league. Said it paid well, said the work was easy.
And you applied?
Well, sir, with hair like mine, I thought I had as good a chance as any.
He paused, as if recalling the scene.
I've never seen such a crowd in my life. Red-headed men everywhere, every shade you could imagine. The street was packed.
Holmes leaned forward slightly.
And yet, you succeeded.
Yes, a small man, very red-headed himself, interviewed me, looked me over, even pulled my hair to make sure it was real.
Holmes smiled faintly.
A sensible precaution.
He told me I was perfect for the position.
And the work?
Wilson hesitated, as if even now it seemed ridiculous.
To copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Holmes raised an eyebrow.
Indeed.
4 hours a day, 10 to 2, £4 a week.
And you accepted?
I did, sir. Of course I did.
Holmes nodded slowly.
And you attended every day?
Without fail. For 8 weeks.
Holmes's fingers tapped lightly together.
And during that time, your assistant remained at your shop?
Yes,
And your business continued as usual?
as far as I could tell.
There was a pause. Holmes's expression had changed. The light amusement was gone. In its place was something sharper, focused, intent.
And then
He said quietly.
it ended.
Wilson nodded grimly.
This very morning I went as usual and found the door locked.
He reached into his coat and produced a small card. Holmes took it, glanced at it briefly, then passed it to me. It read, "The Red-Headed League is dissolved. Nothing more." Silence filled the room. Then, quite unexpectedly, Holmes began to laugh. Not mockingly, but with genuine delight.
A most singular case, most singular indeed.
Wilson shifted uncomfortably.
I fail to see the humor, Mr. Holmes.
Holmes composed himself at once.
Forgive me. I assure you I take the matter very seriously. In fact,
He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly.
I believe it may involve something far more significant than it first appears.
Wilson leaned forward eagerly.
Then you'll help me?
Holmes rose slowly.
I shall look into it at once.
He turned to me.
Watson, we may have something interesting on our hands.
And in that moment, I knew. Whatever this strange tale of red hair and copying books might seem, it was only the beginning. Holmes did not rush. That, I had learned, was often the first sign that his mind was moving at full speed. Instead of immediately pursuing inquiries or dispatching telegrams, he leaned back into his chair, steepled his fingers, and regarded the ceiling with a calm, almost idle expression. Yet I knew better. Behind that stillness, something was aligning, assembling, taking shape.
Well, Watson,
He said at last.
what do you make of it?
I confess, I replied. I make nothing of it at all. It seems absurd. A prank, perhaps, or some elaborate joke. Holmes shook his head slowly.
No. There is method here, purpose. The more bizarre a case appears, the more carefully we must examine it, for it is often in such absurdities that the most serious designs are concealed.
He rose abruptly.
Come, we shall begin at once.
Our journey took us by the underground to Aldersgate, and from there on foot to Saxe-Coburg Square. The place struck me at once as dull and lifeless. A small enclosed square bordered by rows of aging brick houses, their faces dulled by soot and time. A patch of struggling grass occupied the center, surrounded by a low iron railing. It was the sort of place one might pass without a second glance and forget entirely moments later. And yet, to Holmes, no place was insignificant. He slowed as we approached the pawnbroker's shop, marked by 3 gilt balls and the name Jabez Wilson painted upon a weathered board. He did not enter. Instead, he stood quite still, his head slightly inclined, his eyes moving over every detail: the windows, the door, the neighboring buildings, even the pavement beneath his feet. Then, without a word, he began to walk. Up the street, down again, across to the opposite side. Each movement deliberate, measured, as if he were mapping something invisible. Finally, he returned to the shop front, and then, quite unexpectedly, he struck the pavement with his walking stick. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed dully. Before I could question him, he stepped forward and knocked at the door. It was opened almost immediately. A young man stood there. He was clean-shaven, quick-eyed, and alert. There was something about him, something sharp and controlled, that made an immediate impression.
Yes?
He asked. Holmes smiled pleasantly.
I wonder if you would be so kind as to direct me to the Strand.
The answer came without hesitation.
3rd right, 4th left.
Thank you.
The door closed. We walked away in silence. After several moments, Holmes spoke.
A remarkable fellow.
You noticed him then? I said.
Very much so.
I assume that was your purpose in knocking? Holmes shook his head slightly.
Not entirely.
Then what?
The knees of his trousers.
I stared at him. I beg your pardon?
What did you observe, Watson?
Nothing of note.
Precisely. And yet, they are the most telling detail of all.
He glanced at me briefly.
They were worn, creased, marked in a way that suggests constant pressure, kneeling repeatedly over a prolonged period.
A faint chill passed through me. Kneeling? For what purpose? Holmes did not answer directly. Instead, he gestured toward the street behind us.
Come, the answer lies not here, but beyond.
We turned the corner, and at once the atmosphere changed. Where Saxe-Coburg Square had been quiet and stagnant, this street was alive, crowded with traffic, lined with shops, filled with movement and noise. Carriages rattled past, pedestrians hurried along the pavement, and commerce flowed in a steady, relentless stream. Holmes paused at the corner, scanning the row of buildings.
There,
He murmured.
let us see.
He pointed them out one by one.
A tobacconist, a newspaper shop, and there,
His eyes sharpened.
the City and Suburban Bank.
I felt a sudden tightening in my chest. You believe,
I believe
he said calmly.
that our red-headed friend has been the victim of a very clever distraction,
He turned to me.
and that somewhere beneath his shop, work has been taking place.
A tunnel, I said quietly. Holmes gave a slight nod.
Precisely.
We lunched briefly, though I confess I could scarcely taste the food. My mind was too occupied with the implications of what Holmes had uncovered. A tunnel, a bank, a criminal scheme unfolding beneath the very streets of London. Yet Holmes remained composed, almost serene. Afterward, we attended a concert at St. James's Hall. It struck me as extraordinary that, in the midst of such a case, Holmes could sit in perfect contentment, absorbed in music, his long fingers moving gently in time with the violin. But I had seen this before. It was his way. Periods of intense mental activity followed by moments of complete detachment, as if he allowed his mind to settle, to clarify, before the final move. When we left, evening had fallen.
You will return home now, Watson, but I shall require your assistance later.
At what time?
10 o'clock. And bring your revolver.
The calmness with which he said it made the words all the more striking.
There may be danger,
He added lightly. That night, I arrived at Baker Street precisely at the appointed hour. 2 cabs stood outside. Inside, I found Holmes in conversation with 2 gentlemen. One I recognized immediately, Inspector Jones of Scotland Yard. The other was a tall, somber man with an air of quiet importance.
Watson, allow me to introduce Mr. Merriweather, a director of the bank.
The bank. Of course, the pieces were falling into place. Holmes turned to us all.
Gentlemen, I believe that tonight we shall witness the conclusion of this curious affair.
Jones gave a confident nod.
We've been after this man for years.
This man? I asked. Holmes's eyes gleamed faintly.
John Clay,
Even the name seemed to carry weight.
a criminal of exceptional ability, educated, resourceful, and entirely without scruple.
Jones added grimly.
Murderer, thief, forger, one of the best.
A silence followed. Then Holmes clapped his hands softly.
Come, we must not keep our quarry waiting.
We travelled through the dimly lit streets of London until we reached the bank. From there, we were led through a side entrance, down a narrow passage, through heavy iron gates, and finally into a vast underground vault. The air was cold, damp, heavy with the scent of earth and metal. Crates were stacked along the walls. Somewhere within them, a fortune in gold. Holmes moved quickly now, all trace of languor gone.
We have perhaps an hour,
He said quietly.
They will not act until Mr. Wilson is safely at home.
He turned to us.
Take your positions. When I give the signal, move swiftly.
The lantern was shuttered. Darkness fell, complete, absolute. Time stretched. Every sound became magnified. The faint shifting of breath, the creak of wood, the distant murmur of the city far above us. And then a light, faint at first, a thin glowing line across the floor. I held my breath. The line widened, a stone shifted, and from the darkness below, a hand emerged, white, searching, feeling its way into the room. The moment hung, suspended, in silence. And then the trap was sprung. Holmes moved before the rest of us even fully understood what we were seeing. The instant that pale hand appeared through the opening in the stone floor, he sprang forward with a sudden controlled force, like a coiled spring released. The slab shifted further. A square opening widened. Lantern light spilled upward from below, casting sharp, trembling shadows across the vault. Then a face appeared. Young, clean-cut, almost boyish, but the eyes, sharp, calculating, betrayed something far more dangerous. He scanned the room, quickly, cautiously.
It's clear.
He whispered. In one fluid motion, he pulled himself upward, placing a knee upon the edge of the opening, then rising fully into the vault. Behind him, another figure followed, slighter, quicker, and crowned with a shock of vivid red hair. In that instant, everything aligned in my mind. The league, the copying, the distraction. Holmes's voice cut through the darkness.
Now!
The lantern flared to life. Blinding light filled the vault. Holmes lunged forward and seized the first man by the collar with unyielding precision. The second man reacted instantly, diving back toward the opening, but not before Inspector Jones caught hold of his coat. There was a sharp, tearing sound as fabric ripped free.
He's slipping!
Jones barked. From below came the echo of running footsteps, then shouts.
He's met by the others.
Holmes said sharply.
The front is covered.
The man in Holmes's grip did not struggle wildly. Instead, he straightened, calm, composed, almost amused. A revolver flashed in his hand, but before he could raise it, Holmes's hunting crop struck his wrist with swift accuracy. The weapon clattered harmlessly onto the stone floor.
It's no use, John Clay,
Holmes said evenly.
You are quite finished.
For the first time, the man's expression shifted, not to fear, but to recognition.
So,
He said quietly.
it is you.
His voice was controlled, cultured. There was even a trace of admiration in it.
I might have known.
Holmes inclined his head slightly.
And I might say the same of you. Your work has been admirable.
Jones stepped forward, snapping handcuffs onto the prisoner's wrists. The man regarded them with mild distaste.
I would ask
He said coolly.
that you refrain from unnecessary familiarity. I have royal blood in my veins.
Jones gave a short laugh.
Have you now?
And when you address me,
The man continued calmly.
I should prefer sir.
Jones grinned.
Very good, sir. Would you kindly step this way, sir, so we can escort you to the station, sir?
The prisoner gave a small, graceful bow.
Much better.
And with that, John Clay, one of the most dangerous criminals in London, allowed himself to be led away. The tension dissolved as suddenly as it had formed. Mr. Merriweather exhaled deeply, wiping his brow.
Mr. Holmes, I scarcely know how to thank you. This could have been a disaster.
Holmes waved the gratitude aside lightly.
You may consider the matter settled, though I shall expect reimbursement for certain expenses.
Merriweather nodded eagerly.
Of course, of course.
Holmes turned to me.
Come, Watson. I think we have earned a quiet conclusion.
It was well past midnight when we returned to Baker Street. A small fire burned in the grate. Holmes poured himself a modest measure of whiskey and sank into his chair with visible satisfaction. I, for my part, could no longer restrain my curiosity. Holmes, I said, you must explain. From the very beginning, how did you see through it all? He smiled faintly.
It was, in truth, quite straightforward.
I raised an eyebrow. Straightforward?
To observe and to reason. Nothing more.
He leaned back, his eyes half closed.
Consider the essential fact. A man is offered a well-paid position for trivial work, with the sole condition that he must remain away from his home for several hours each day.
He paused.
What does that suggest?
That someone wanted him out of the way, I said.
Exactly.
Holmes nodded.
The method was elaborate, yes, but the purpose was simple. Remove the pawnbroker from his premises, regularly, reliably.
And the League?
A fabrication, ingenious certainly, but only a means to an end.
I considered this. But why such an elaborate scheme? Holmes's eyes opened slightly.
Because the stakes were high.
He gestured vaguely toward the city beyond.
A bank, a vault, a considerable sum in gold.
Understanding dawned fully now. And the assistant?
Vincent Spaulding, or rather, John Clay. The criminal. One of the most capable in London, his decision to work for half wages was the clearest indication that something was amiss. No man of ability undervalues himself without reason.
Holmes leaned forward slightly.
Then there was his habit of disappearing into the cellar, hours at a time.
The tunnel, I said.
Precisely.
He continued smoothly.
When we visited the shop, I confirmed what I suspected. The pavement told me that the cellar extended behind, not in front. The condition of his knees confirmed the digging.
And the bank, I added.
A simple matter of geography. Once I saw what stood behind the shop, the entire plan became clear.
I shook my head slowly. And the timing. How did you know they would act tonight? Holmes smiled.
When the League was dissolved, it meant their work was complete, the tunnel finished. They no longer required Mr. Wilson's absence.
He lifted his glass slightly.
Saturday offered them the best opportunity, 2 full days before discovery.
I could not help but admire the elegance of it all. It is a remarkable chain of reasoning. Holmes gave a small shrug.
Each link follows naturally from the last.
He leaned back, a trace of weariness returning.
These little problems, they are a welcome diversion.
I studied him for a moment. To others, you are more than that. You prevent crime. You protect lives. Holmes waved the thought aside.
Perhaps, or perhaps I merely entertain myself.
A faint smile touched his lips.
My life, Watson, is a constant effort to escape the dull routine of existence.
He gazed into the fire.
And occasionally, I succeed.
The flames flickered softly. Outside, London slept, and the strange case of the Red-Headed League had come, at last, to its quiet and satisfying end. The case, in its practical sense, was over. John Clay was in custody. The attempted robbery had been prevented. The bank's gold remained untouched. And yet, as was often the case with Holmes, the conclusion of events did not immediately bring stillness. For him, resolution was not the end of motion, but the beginning of reflection. The days that followed passed quietly. London resumed its usual rhythm, indifferent as ever to the narrow avoidance of catastrophe beneath its streets. Newspapers carried brief accounts of the attempted bank robbery. Some mentioned Holmes. Most did not. Holmes himself showed no interest in public recognition. Indeed, by the following afternoon, he had already drifted into that familiar state of subdued restlessness. I found him seated by the window, violin resting across his lap, though he was not playing. "Already bored?" I asked. He did not look at me.
Not bored, Watson,
He replied softly.
merely unstimulated.
For most men, preventing a major bank robbery would suffice for at least a week,
For most men,
Holmes said.
certainty is satisfying.
And for you? He turned his gaze slightly, though his eyes remained distant.
For me, certainty is temporary.
He rose and crossed to the mantelpiece, where the morning papers lay untouched.
The Red-Headed League, a ridiculous invention, and yet remarkably effective.
He picked up the small card that Wilson had left behind, the one that had announced the League's sudden dissolution. Such a simple object, and yet it marked the exact moment when illusion gave way to reality.
It is curious,
Holmes continued,
how easily the human mind accepts the improbable, provided it is presented with confidence.
"You mean Mr. Wilson?"
Yes.
He turned the card over in his fingers.
A man is told that a secret society exists, that it pays him generously, that his hair alone qualifies him for employment, and he accepts it.
Well, it did not cost him anything. On the contrary, he profited from it.
Precisely,
Holmes replied.
which made the deception all the more effective.
He placed the card back upon the table.
No one suspects the hand that gives.
A quiet silence settled between us. Outside, the muted sounds of Baker Street drifted upward. The distant rumble of carriage wheels, the echo of footsteps, the faint murmur of voices, life continuing. Unaware. I watched Holmes as he stood there, still and thoughtful. "You admire him," I said after a moment. Holmes's brow lifted slightly.
Whom?
"John Clay." There was no hesitation.
Yes,
The answer was calm, direct,
he is dangerous, ruthless, but undeniably brilliant.
and that earns your respect.
It earns my attention.
Holmes moved back toward his chair.
There is a certain elegance in a well-constructed crime, Watson. Not in its intent, but in its execution.
He sat, resting his hands lightly upon the arms of the chair.
The League was absurd on the surface, but beneath it, flawless logic.
He began to trace it aloud, almost as if revisiting the structure for his own satisfaction.
A distraction that isolates the target. A loyal accomplice placed within immediate reach. A controlled schedule. A hidden operation beneath the premises. A direct path to the objective.
He paused.
Had it not been for a few small irregularities, they might have succeeded.
"The half wages," I said.
And the cellar.
"And the knees," I added.
Yes, the knees.
He reached for his violin at last. This time he lifted it to his shoulder. The first notes were low, measured, almost meditative. The melody unfolded slowly, filling the room with a quiet, reflective tone. It was not triumphant, nor mournful. Something in between, as though the music itself understood what words could not fully express, that even in victory there lingers the awareness of how close failure had come. "You know," I said after some time, "Mr. Wilson will likely never understand how near he was to disaster." Holmes did not stop playing.
He need not.
"Does that not trouble you?"
No.
The answer came between phrases.
For most people, ignorance is a form of comfort.
The music softened.
And comfort is often preferable to truth.
The final note lingered, then faded. Holmes lowered the violin slowly. The room returned to silence. After a moment he sighed, softly, almost imperceptibly, and in that sigh, I heard it. The return of stillness, of routine, of that quiet, persistent emptiness he so often sought to escape.
Well,
He said at last, rising once more.
I wonder what the next problem will be.
I smiled. "With London as it is, I doubt you will have long to wait." Holmes glanced toward the window. The faintest hint of anticipation returned to his eyes.
Yes,
He said.
I rather think you're right.
And so ended the curious affair of the Red-Headed League. A case born of absurdity, driven by precision, and resolved, as always, by the quiet brilliance of Sherlock Holmes. Yet even as one mystery closed, another, somewhere in the vast and restless city, was already beginning.